I have this very simple Rails application which has a few articles. Let's see how we could add permalinks to them based on the title. So in this case, the ID number 2 would need to be replaced with something along the lines of my second article. We'll need to store this URL-friendly title somewhere, so let's add a column to the articles table really quick. Also, we're going to fetch articles looking up the permalink rather than the ID, so the index I've just added will make these queries much faster. Okay, now let's create a method that will convert the article title to a permalink. Before putting anything inside, it's a good idea to write a spec for it. I have FactoryBot installed to make this a bit easier, although plain fixtures would have worked just as well. Now let's add that spec. I'll be using build stub'd instead of build to keep things fast, as build actually creates the associated has many and belongs to associations. The title should be downcased, special chars like the exclamation mark removed, and spaces replaced with dashes. Okay, let's run this. The spec fails just like we expected because we haven't wrote anything inside our generate permalink method yet. So let's do that now. Rails conveniently offers us a method called parameterize that handles all of our spec requirements. We'll expand on it later, but for now let's see if it works. And it looks like it does. When the article is being saved, let's populate the permalink column we added earlier. However, I'll add a test first. I want this to hit the database, so I won't use build stub'd here. If you haven't seen name subjects before, you can just think about them as a let construct. I'm also going to stop the already tested generate permalink method to return a predefined string. If later on I'll encounter any errors in the permalink generation logic, only the spec that actually tests it will fail. Let's run the specs. Things are red. This is simple enough. On save, we will set a permalink for a callback. Before validation would have also been good, though it requires some extra work like checking if the title is nil. Also, let's make this private. Okay, everything looks good. The website is still using IDs, so we need to force Rails to use our Permalink attribute instead. If we look at the view, this is how the links get created. That is, by passing the object directly. These are easily changed by overriding the toPeram method to return our Permalink attribute rather than ID. Okay, let's see if this worked. It looks like our existing database records have the permalink nil, which is why Rails fails to build the article URLs. Basically, we can fix this by going over each record and saving it, as it will trigger the permalink generation. And if we refresh the page, the error went away. The URL in the bottom left corner also looks good. However, if we try to visit it, we're greeted by another error. What's happening is that inside the controller, I am still fetching the article by the ID rather than the permalink I'm now providing. I'm only going to test the show action, which is where the browser error we just seen has occurred. I'll start by making a new spec file for the controller and then creating an article record using factory bot. The permalink attribute I've set will get overwritten on save, so let's set it only if it doesn't already exist. This is probably for the best, because if the title changes, we likely don't want to change the permalink, as people reaching this from Google might get 404 errors. Now let's add the test for the happy path, which is when the request was successful and the article was found. Let's see it fail. The article is being set by the setArticle method, and fortunately this is the only place I'll need to touch. And now to fix it, I will change the article lookup to use the permalink. Has this fixed it? Looks like it. And lastly, if no record with the provided permalink exists, the request should raise a 404 exception, similar to the browser one we've seen earlier. Let's try it out. Alright, this fails because I had an oversight earlier when replacing find with find by. I need to change this to find by ! So an exception will be raised when no record is found. Let's give it one more go. And it works. Now for the moment of truth. It appears everything is working fine now. However, there's still an important issue that needs to be addressed. Just like the table ID, the permalink must be unique. For example, there might be multiple articles sharing the same title. I'm going to address this issue by writing another spec for the generate permalink method, where an article with the same title already exists. Other than that, this is a copy of the first test we wrote. The new permalink should have a suffix 1, 2, and so on, depending on how many duplicates there are. Let's run it and see it fail. To fix it, I'm going to do this incrementally, just the bare minimum to satisfy the test. We'll store the permalink in a temporary variable, and then, if there are any articles with the same title, I'll suffix it with -1. And now back to the specs. This works, but let's handle more than one duplicate. I'm going to copy the test we just wrote and change it to have 3 existing records instead of 1. FactoryBot's createList method is really helpful here. So the permalink should be suffixed with 3, as the first one doesn't have any suffix. Let's pass the number of iterations as an argument, starting from 0. If an article already exists, then we'll recall the method and increment the counter. And only if the count is greater than 0, we would add the suffix with the number of iterations we made so far. Now back to the specs. The recursive function worked. Let's try this out in the browser by creating a new article, having the name of an existing entry, just like we did in the tests. The duplicate permalink looks good. I'll create one more article copy just to be on the safe side. This is great. The permalink is suffixed correctly. Let's handle some edge cases now. Looking over the schema, I noticed that both the title and permalink are strings, which in SQL terms means the varchar fields, usually limited to 255 characters. By suffixing the permalink, we might get stuck in a loop when generating the string for a duplicate title having max length. There are multiple ways to handle this, such as increasing the field length. However, I'll fix it by truncating its size to 50 characters in order to make it easier to share with others. I think I'll duplicate the first spec I wrote because we don't need to hit the database. We just want a very long title. Let's save this and run the specs. This is some nice output on why it failed. To fix this, I'll just take the first 50 characters. 0 is the first element, so the last is 49. What's nice about running specs now is that we'll know not only that the permalinks are truncated correctly, but also that the change we've just made doesn't break on shorter strings. Let's do one more thing. We currently only set a permalink when an article is created. Let's give the users the ability to change it on edit if they really want to. I'll create a checkbox that, when ticked, will force the article's permalink to be regenerated. Let's call it regenerate permalink and add a label to it. This form partial is used both when creating and editing articles, so let's show this only on edit. Also, we need to whitelist the checkbox value in the permitted parameters. In the article model, first I'm adding an accessor that will be set by the form I edited earlier. If the regenerate permalink value is present or this is a new record, the permalink will get set. On the other hand, if this is a new record, let's keep the behavior that the permalink is set only when one isn't already present. Because we're also editing existing records, let's make sure that when looking up duplicates, we are ignoring the record we're in. Let's try it out. The permalink was updated, which is good. And let's see it working as before. This didn't work. What's happening is that the generate permalink flag is sent as a string, be it 1 or 0, so it always gets evaluated to true. We can easily handle this case and nil values by typecasting it to an integer and making sure it's greater than 0. Let's try this again, first with a checked value, and then without checking anything. It's working, and with this we have completed implementing a basic permalink system from scratch. Thanks for watching.